In this segment, we'll study the use of large-scale field trials by looking at a specific example of research done by Marianne Bertrand and her colleagues, in which the central question that they tried to answer was, what is the value of advertising content? Now, before we look at the actual experiment itself, let's think a little bit about large-scale field trials more generally. Unlike some of the experiments we reviewed earlier, some field trials, which are also called randomized controlled trials or RCTs, use a really large number of factors, each with multiple levels. This results in a very large number of conditions that need to be analyzed. And so rather than using ANOVA, regression analysis turns out to be the easiest method of data analysis. Let's now turn to the specific example of the project by Marianne Bertrand and her colleagues. The goal of this paper is to test the effectiveness of advertising content on the take-up of a loan offer in a field experiment, and to estimate demand sensitivity to advertising content, compare it with price elasticity and the demand sensitivity to deadlines. Now, in essence, what these authors were trying to do is they were trying to send out solicitations for a loan product in which they manipulated both the features of the loan as well as advertising content, and they were trying to understand what the effect of changing the advertising content was on the take-up rates. So this was a field experiment which was done in the nature of what we called a randomized controlled trial. The advertisement varied on 10 factors, both advertising factors and loan features. Each factor had multiple levels, 2 or 3. For example, one factor that was used was a photograph. There were 3 levels. In one set of conditions, there was no photo on the solicitation. In a second set of conditions, there was a female photo, and in the third, a male photo. A second factor was the number of example loans that were shown in the solicitation. Some solicitations had just 1 example, others had 4. Likewise, information about the interest rate was either shown or not shown. Suggested loan uses were either not specified or were specified. There was either a comparison to an outside rate or no comparison, and so on and so forth. So in total, there were 10 factors, each of which had 2 or 3 levels. So you can see very quickly that the total number of conditions was extremely large. Participants in this study were 53,194 former clients of a consumer lender in South Africa who received a direct mail solicitation from the lender, and of course that solicitation, as we said, varied as a function of these factors and the levels. The authors used a probit type of regression to look at the effect of each of these factors on the take-up or the likelihood that the loan was actually accepted by the recipient. The results are shown here, and in fact this table is a subset of the complete table that's available in the paper, and it shows only statistically significant effects, as you can see the ones with stars marked on them. Let's look for a moment on the full probit, which is the result for the entire sample put together. We found that 4 variables were significant. The first one was the interest rate, the actual interest rate. And the coefficient for the interest rate was negative and significant. It was negative because as the interest rate went up, the likelihood of accepting the loan went down. This is perfectly consistent with economic theory, with rational decision making, that as you pay more for the loan, you are less likely to want it. The second thing that was significant and surprising from the standpoint of pure economic theory was the presence of a female photo. Simply putting a female photo increased the likelihood that the loan was taken up. Likewise, providing only 1 example of a loan increased the likelihood that the loan was taken up. And finally, mentioning no specific uses of the loan also increased the likelihood that the loan was taken up. So while the first of these factors is what one would call a rational reason for influencing the take-up rate. The other 3 factors were simply factors that were part of advertising content that also had significant effects on the take-up rates. Notice that all the factors had an effect on the male respondents, whereas only the interest rate had an effect on the female respondents. So what was the conclusion? Across the 8 advertising features that were tested, 3 variations that we just saw here have a substantial impact on applications for the loan offer, including a photo of an attractive woman, showing one loan example and not mentioning the specific use of the loan increased the probability of applying for that loan before the deadline.